The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire with an extra special bonus episode of Gone by Lunchtime. Chris Hipkins has just completed a trip to China with a big old business delegation and a bunch of media, among them our very own Madeleine Chapman, editor of the Spinoff, who's just arrived back, parachuted out of the 757, the Prayer Force One, one of them, and has landed here in the studio. Hi, Mad.
Hello.
Fascinating trip. Beijing, Shanghai, and...
Just those two.
Yeah.
Although Hipkins went to Tianjin
Okay.
for the World Economic Forum, which I did not go to.
Right, that's right. No, because you know that it's a secret plot to take over the world. You
Yes.
steer clear of them.
And I instead went to the Great Wall, which
Great
was
Wall.
genuinely much more interesting.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, good call. You did go to the Great Hall too. Let's start there because that's this incredible, famous place. It's in a way, like being in the Oval Office or something, really. And although I guess a bit more exhibitional. Tell me about that. You were in there. Paint us a picture. What was it like seeing Chris Hipkins go to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing to meet President Xi?
It's interesting that you mention the Oval Office or the White House, because some of the reporters who had been there for, I think, Joe Biden, maybe, basically said, this is much more impressive than than the White House. Just for sheer scale, it is a humongous place.
Yeah.
You kind of walk in and you don't really feel like you're walking inside somewhere because it's just, you're still just surrounded by open air, essentially. And everything is sort of confusingly big in that, like a tree in there is massive or a plant is huge and the tables are huge. So everything is just massive. Yeah. And the one hint that you can get is, I think I put up a photo, it's a very bad photo, but it was showing people walking through a door and the door is huge and the only thing that's for scale really is the lift next to it, which is like only goes up like a third of the way up the doorway. And I think that there was the one ordinary size thing in the whole place. But everything is just, I kind of, they make jokes about how when Hipkins met Xi, they were sitting like 10 meters apart at these huge oak tables. But if they had been sitting at a table like this, it would have looked like they were in the middle of a rugby field having a meeting. Like, it would look ridiculous. Right. So it would look even worse than what they did, which was this huge, grand... long banquet
So adjusted
tables.
for scale, they seemed relatively close together.
Yeah, like it seemed appropriate. It was also like the Chinese officials were very strict on, there's a lot of security going in, obviously. Everyone couldn't take in water, which was a interesting restriction. Your press badges had your full name, including middle name, and I think someone read it because it was in Mandarin, said, it says, here on behalf of Chris Hipkins, Prime Minister of New Zealand, like specifically got the date. Like it's all very
Your bank account details.
date of birth, all of that. But it was just a lot of people standing around. Again, lots of open space. At one point, we were in a signing ceremony the day after, which was back at the Great Hall of the People, and I thought, this is a bit boring. I'll just walk out and go back to the press area. And I just sort of walked out and nobody followed me, which they have a lot of minders walking around. And so for the first time I was just by myself and it felt illegal. Like I just sort of wandered out and then I was looking around and I was like, am I about to get arrested? What is happening? And I turned the wrong corner because it's so huge. And then just all of these men in suits just sort of whip their heads like, who was that? And I was like, no, it's nothing. And then sort of like shuffled back and found my people in the press room. But it's very, it's quite daunting. It's like very silent. Everything's so quiet. Nobody talks. Everybody wears black. It's it was a real experience. And then kind of in a way where you leave and you go, it didn't need to be that quiet, it's all just, it's kind of a bit of a show. But
and it wasn't the only one. Hipkins was there, was the second meeting of the day in the Great Hall with Xi, was that right?
Yes, well, at least the second.
Yeah, because there were like 4, I think, across 2 days, and they were put on the front pages of some of the papers.
Yeah, the identical photos of him meeting all of the leaders.
Yeah, there was one of the leaders got more of a smile. I can't remember which one it was. It was kind of like he's obviously said something very funny because I've never seen Xi smiling so broadly.
He did give a genuine smile to Hipkins during the opening remarks, I think it was when he said friend and partner. Actually,
right?
It was looked like a quite warm, genuine smile. He definitely seemed fairly relaxed, which might have been a result of his Barbados meeting just before. Might have gone pretty well, so it's in a good mood.
Sort of, that's right. A kind of good curtain raiser with Barbados, sort of lighten the load. And so there were those opening remarks, and then what? And you got that those weren't before the media, and then they disappeared, or you were disappeared out of the room.
Yes, we were disappeared.
I don't mean that in a sinister way.
No, so they were very strict on how many media could go. So I was one of 2 sort of print media that were allowed in, me and Luke Malpass from Stuff. And I thought, they must be really particular because there's not much room and they don't want to crowd it. We walked in, you got to walk about 30 metres just to get up to the rope inside the room in order to stand there at a safe distance. And I think I took a photo of behind us because behind us it was just, you could fit about 300 journalists in there if you wanted to and you'd still be fine. But so they did the opening remarks, they had the translators, you had to listen through the earpiece, and then as soon as Chris Hipkins finished his response, then they lower the rope and they do some very silent shuffling to get everyone out. And so I think I caught one extra sentence or something from Xi as we were walking out in the earpiece, which was sort of he did a bit of a repeat of what he'd already said about how the trip's going to be great, but then also said, we assume this trip will help you understand China more, or it's sort of like a deepening of the trust and understanding of China after this trip. So, and then they cut off the headset, and then they just close the door, and then that's it. And then they lead you outside. And
then that's all you get to see of Xi. And then you went back to the hotel, I think, and there was a stand-up with Hipkins to hear about what went down.
Yeah, or not really hear about. not hear about what went down.
Hear the words warm and constructive.
Oh my gosh,
maybe 10 times over and then they kept going. Even I was watching one of the stand-ups in Shanghai, and they were still banging on about everyone's warm and constructive, as if that had been really, really rattled into their brains.
I think he was. I think he maybe overcompensated because of Justin Trudeau getting told off for revealing too much about his meeting.
And that was why he was particularly pronounced in saying, I shall not speak for what President Xi said. I can only say what I said. Wasn't he? He was sort of almost strained,
And then he stumbled a bit on the friend and partner thing. I think he kind of instinctively tried not to answer the question, and then maybe after a while realised that actually it's a fairly standard question and a bit of a pleasantry, and probably it's fine for him to just say, yeah, sure, we're friends and partners.
But you've been so, and he himself has said he was a relative rookie of, foreign policy, and it's like one of those word games, like where you can't say yes and no, or one of those other things, and so you're, or just a minute, where you can't repeat, you're sort of talking and trying to sound human, but conscious that everything could be a trap.
Yeah.
And then you could go falling deep into the bowels of the earth, right?
Yeah, I think that was clearly the kind of approach going in. Even, when people said, was this topic raised, which was the dictator question.
Yes.
And he said, well, I'm not going to say what they said. And they go, well, you don't have to say what he said, but did it come up? Yeah. Well, I won't say what he said. And then he goes, well, we didn't bring it up.
That's right. Like, but then he pauses and goes, we didn't bring it up. It's kind of like, as if
you go, well, okay, you've answered the question, I guess. But
yeah. And that was, of course, because Biden had, in remarks following Anthony Blinken's visit to Beijing, said that Xi was a dictator. Which pretty much
You're going
is.
semantically
he's an
with definitions like that,
leader of a non-democratic nation. Anyway, but Hipkins obviously, and clearly Xi liked that. That was, and I think that was kind of made known in various ways, including that I didn't raise it, but da-da-da-da. And in terms of these kind of verbal gymnastics, right, like there are other things like the last thing you want to do is like accidentally describe Taiwan as a country. Again, which it is, for fear that you might, suddenly create some kind of diplomatic crisis. And so he did. Do you think he? I mean, here's the other side of this too that we should not kind of joke about. Is there obviously these very serious human rights questions? What's going on in Xinjiang and with the Uyghurs that some describe as a genocide? It's very serious, and it seemed pretty clear that Chris Hipkins had kind of just gone through, done what he needed to do in a relatively perfunctory fashion and said, we are concerned about X, we are concerned about Y. Was that the sense you got?
Yes, I think, the fact that he said they were referenced rather than addressed is quite a spit, for someone who was very careful with his words, that's quite telling. But, I think it does, it's one of those ones where it makes sense to question that, but at the same time, in terms of an outcome, I think obviously there would be little, Xi's not going to go, oh, no one's ever said that to me before.
That does make me think.
Maybe I should reconsider some of my actions. But it also sort of put some good context into the Nanaia Mahuta, being harangued for an hour, which suggests that she was probably a bit more willing to bring up those things with potentially the more relevant person, her counterpart. So I think that's, I wouldn't, in terms of even if she was, I wouldn't have thought that was a negative outcome for New Zealand, because it just means that she was willing to discuss those things a bit more robustly.
Hope for. That was a report in the Australian, wasn't it, in the days ahead of the Hipkins-Xi meeting that described her as being harangued for an hour. Rather than her haranguing her counterpart for an hour. But you're right. There's obviously a performance aspect to all of this, isn't there? Was there anything, thinking from the political side, the geopolitical side, that couldn't quite comfortably have been predicted or described? Did it ever go off script in any way? Was there any sense of anything that was happening that was unexpected?
I don't think so. I think it did. It was one of those ones where obviously the media stand up after. He got a lot of questions about why he did or didn't raise these, issues, human rights issues. I think overall, in terms of him going into it, I think he was quite pleased with how it all went. It was a very successful meeting in that he did not piss off the Chinese president and jeopardize all of the businesses and trade that had gone over there. And I think that must have ultimately been the goal. And so it was the negative aspect was just, well, how do I let New Zealand and New Zealand media know that I did not bring up this thing that they wanted them to bring up? But in terms of the goals that they wanted, I think it was all it all went swimmingly.
Yeah, and he was. I mean, Hipkins was keen to impress that he had made known to Xi, particularly around Ukraine, their views on that. That's the sort of area where you felt as though he could be a little bit more comfortable and confident in terms of trying to, convey a view. Because it's not, we're really concerned about what you're doing in the Pacific. It's, we feel strongly for that Ukraine has been invaded and need to stand up for it and so on, yeah?
Yeah, and I think his meeting the next day with Premier Li Qiang was... felt like there was a lot of covering topics, and I don't know whether this was already planned or if it was influenced by the reaction to his earlier meeting, but particularly, there was a very specific mention of Māori tourism and Indigenous culture in New Zealand, which was omitted, I suppose, from the president meeting. And then he also was very quick and eager to state that he had discussed at greater length the human rights concerns and things like that. So again, you go, I don't know whether that was a correction or whether they had always planned to have that type of discussion with the Premier rather than the President. And the President was just let's make sure we're still friendly meeting.
Yeah. And when you were there, did you stare deep into Xi's eyes in the way that John Key, for example, has done, and kind of get the world's most inscrutable man? Were you able to? Did you feel as though you understood him properly and well? Did you? Give us how were the Chapman vibes?
One thing that was interesting that I didn't note in my report on the meeting, which I kind of only realised after, was that most of the people in that room, particularly the journalists, they're all looking around, seeing what's happening. I was certainly looking around, making notes. The security people, they're that's their whole job, is essentially just to look straight ahead and be inscrutable. But the people on the tables, on the New Zealand side, there was a little bit of like, oh, let's have a look at, the media's coming in, let's have a look at them, and then let's have a look at like who else is around. Xi Jinping does not look at anyone else. Like he's not curious about what's going on in the room around. I mean, because he knows what's going on in the room around him. So it was literally just stare down at the paper, stare up at Chris Hipkins.
Okay, so Chris Hipkins was the only person who got to stare deeply into his eyes. That's the same as John Key, right? So
deeply from a distance, Get that lovely smile, yeah. And
one of the reasons that Hipkins meeting is important is that the trip as a whole, in large part, is kind of it's a sales exercise, right? Like obviously to reopen doors to the trade delegation, all that sort of stuff. But tell us a bit about that. You wrote quite entertainingly about Hipkins selling New Zealand in how many minutes was it? 17?
17. Yeah.
What was it's quite a lot of. It is quite a sales job that is Hipkins as New Zealand. I think more than many countries, partly because of our size and our nature, is that it's their job too. There aren't. The Prime Minister is expected to go out there and press the flesh and cut the ribbons and give 1,000 speeches and, was that what you saw?
Yes, the schedule was packed, even apparently by regular trade mission standards. Like they really packed him in there. It did the feedback from the businesses who were present. There was 29 of them. Anyone I happened to speak to at one of the many events did say that having Chris Hipkins in the room just opened a lot of doors. What did the wording was sort of knocking on open doors, basically. Like there's a tech company that had a meeting over there about kind of developing relationships in gaming and things like that. And he said that there was more done in that one meeting than 10 years of sort of virtual discussions that had been had. So I think that's ultimately, he was just there to kind of introduce people and shepherd people into a meeting room together. But some of the stuff I just thought, I hope this pays off, because this seems like not a great use of the Prime Minister's time to be saying, he said New Zealand is open for business. That was the big tagline that was said in every single speech. And then he would shake some hands, take some photos, eat an item of food way too quickly. I did advise one of his staff members that they should remind him that if he takes smaller spoonfuls of things, you don't have to open your mouth as wide, because there were a lot of photos of him eating with like mouth wide open in local media, and I was like, you got to do a small fork, small mouthful.
Okay.
Otherwise, you get the John Key hot dog photo.
Do a video demonstrating that I could provide to this.
I mean, I can see why he was doing it, because he wanted to finish it quickly so he could move on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no. Not
and
good. A lot of eating.
It wasn't until the last day that the sausage rolls were rolled out, I think.
I had one of those and it was really good.
Was it?
I think there was a lot of mocking about that.
Was it warm and constructive?
No, actually. It was a little bit cold.
Oh.
But that was a Fonterra event, so I thought, oh yeah, local, a bit of local connection, so it makes sense that they would probably be aware of the sausage rolls, and made a joke about it. But that was the only item in about 20 items that they had put out that was empty by the time everyone left. Like, they were a hit.
Right. Well,
he's got something. He's onto something with the sausage rolls.
You got to have a thing. Just on that, when you mentioned the Grey Hall and you turned that corner and then suddenly you saw some people walking after you, how was that true of the entire trip? Was it sort of stage managed to within an inch of its life? Could you? I mean, I'm thinking of those years ago when Patrick Gower disappeared off to the Aurovita office in Shanghai. Were you kept on? I mean, I don't want to say tight leash, but was the media pretty well contained for the course of that week?
Yes, it was. There weren't a lot of opportunities to. You would basically have to decline to be present for either an event or a media stand-up in order to do something else. I think the whole week, probably the most time that was like quote-unquote free, which is essentially now you can write your stories, was like an hour max, or late in the evening, I suppose. So everything was, there wasn't a lot of free time. I think I went for a walk that required missing an event. Like, that was about the extent. I went for a walk and had dinner and ordered about 5 times as much food as I could eat by accident. So,
did you eat it with a little fork?
No, actually, it was a hot pot. But yeah, so there wasn't much room to kind of go exploring. It's also, you're not going to get very far because all of the embassy people are kind of your minders and they can speak Mandarin and help you get around. And also, traffic-wise, we got everywhere very quickly because we were on the back of the motorcade most of the time. We dropped off a couple of times, which caused a bit of drama. But once you're off the motorcade, you're not going anywhere fast. So it was probably just safer for most people to just follow the program.
And one of the kind of perennials almost of trips abroad by prime ministers or presidents or whatever is that there's always the domestic reality playing away in its own humdrum fashion. Sometimes there are coups mounted in years gone by when leaders are abroad. Chris Hipkins has so far this year had the Mecca Whaitiri thing happen when he was in Europe. He was sort of constantly checking his phone or calling and not getting fully ghosted by Mecca. This time, the Kiri Allan story started to emerge while Hipkins was in, I suppose it was at Beijing at the end and then Shanghai. What was that like? I mean, I'm sort of fascinated by the kind of anthropology of it in a way, because it's this crazy juxtaposition of this incredibly, could not have a bigger geopolitical engagement, notwithstanding the stage management of it all that sort of stuff. And then on the domestic front, you've got this really quite kind of, what else should we say, bread and butter type scandal emerging, involving a minister who's alleged to have shouted at some people and so on. How was it managing that? Did the whole press gallery, of course, become focused on that because that's their own day-to-day focus? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the story came out Andrew Vance's original reporting came out while Hipkins was in the meeting with the Premier. So he had the meeting.
Yeah.
They went off to chat a bit, and then they were going to sign some documents. So we were all sitting around waiting for the signing part, and then suddenly somebody said, "Ooh, have you read this?" And then, everyone got out their phones. There was a bit of chat about that, but obviously it meant that all of the questions that had been planned to ask him about his meeting with the Premier then shifted to what's going on with Kiri Allan. So that was then, even though there are press gallery reporters also in the country at the same time, they don't have access to the Prime Minister. So even though we're there to report on the China trip, everyone's situation, turns to whatever the most pressing issue is for the Prime Minister. So that meant that he did all of that, shook some more hands, came to the media stand-up, got immediately questioned at length about Kiri Allan, and then a little bit about his meeting with the Premier, and then had to go and give a half-an-hour speech at a university, which was quite bad. And I think because he wasn't planning, I think he was planning to finesse the speech.
Yeah, right. Whereas instead he
before he got there.
Briefing notes that have been supplied.
Yeah, and instead he's kind of thinking about this domestic issue going on back home. So it did end up having an effect. I think the next day Thomas Coughlan very sort of delicately, I guess, described him in the stand-up as being quite flat on Wednesday, which he was. It was you could tell he was distracted. He was thinking about other things in the next 4 events that he had to go to after that one. So it did become, I think it kind of overshadowed a little bit, but at the same time, because by then he had had his 2 big meetings, and then it was business, which is a little bit still very important, but I think probably a bit less stressful for him. Then I think that made it kind of less of a derailing and more just a probably annoying thing to have to think about.
Hey, finally, there was the Te Matatini winners were on the trip too, Te Whānau Apanui. Was that a sort of affectation, or was that meaningful? You've written a bit about what you saw there on the site today. Tell us about the role they played in the trip.
Yeah, I started writing the piece that's on the site now on the first day because we went to the Pōwhiri. Well, actually, it started at the airport, at Wellington Airport, at about 5 a.m. We all got ushered into the Koru Lounge eventually because Greg Foran was on the trip. So we all shuffled in there.
He's got the super golden lead.
Yes,
Can I take 120 friends in with me?
Yeah. We all shuffled in there, and then there was a karakia and a waiata, which I thought, oh, that's very nice, and then found out that is not usually what happens in the Koru Lounge before a business delegation trip. And basically we're told, all of the business leaders and the media were told, you will be expected to sing this song anytime we sing it. Essentially then, turns out that the Te Whānau Apanui and the business delegates and the Prime Minister were staying in the same hotel. And the media were in a separate hotel. Yeah.
Did you? I'm sure you looked up what the price comparisons. Were you
they were both very nice. Although
Okay.
I think the other one might have been a little bit nicer. But But it did mean that basically they were practicing in the lobby, with the business delegate, and they spent a lot more time. The kapahaka and the business delegate spent a lot more time than the media did with each other. But essentially, I started writing it as a, oh look, the Prime Minister is correcting the Phil Goff coronation faux pas, which was acknowledged that was part of the reason why they were invited along. And so my original piece was going to be a bit of an assessment of, was this worth it? How did this play out as a bit of a kind of apology / correction? But by the end of it, Te Whānau Apanui were a little bit famous in China. They did a haka on the Great Wall. It went all over Chinese social media.
Right.
They were sort of being recognised around at different events and stuff. And they also, outside of just performing, it wasn't just, and now we're going to do a performance and then you sit down and we carry on with our business.
Yeah.
They were very involved because Peeni Henare being the tourism minister, he did speeches in Te Reo, he did the haka with them. When there was gifting happening, they were very involved in the kind of ceremonial aspects. So it was all a lot more integrated than I expected it to be. And so basically by the end of the trip, I had planned to sort of ask or push a little bit on whether the Prime Minister planned to do this again, because obviously, there's a cost involved and it's a big group. And unprompted, when he was just asked about how he felt about the trip, he said, we're looking to incorporate this more into future mission trips. So I think it is, obviously it helps to have a foreign minister who is Māori and a tourism minister who is Māori. And certainly by the end of the trip, I was starting to wonder, I wonder if you can have a tourism minister who's not Māori or who can't speak Māori, because it really added a whole layer to a lot of Henare speeches, which were very good. So it became this quite amazing integration and I think a much truer representation of what New Zealand has to offer beyond, milk products. And,
that's soft power, right? That's an expression of soft power right there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really great. And they were like definitely outshone the Prime Minister at every event. They were the stars. And I think they, by all accounts, also enjoyed the trip. So, I do think it could be potentially a sort of preview to what future prime ministerial trips will look like in terms of the personnel that's present, or like the non-negotiables, I suppose.
Fascinating. Thank you, Mad. That's Madeleine Chapman, editor of the Spinoff. You can read her piece on the Te Matatini group and a bunch of others on the spinoff.co.nz. Is that right? I think that's
I think that's great.
That's right. Hey, thanks, Samuel, for making this work. Thank you to members. And we will return with a Gone by Lunchtime classic featuring Ben Thomas and Annabelle Mather later in the week. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.